The lights were blinding. Cameras rolled. World leaders from every continent sat upright at the Global Peace Development Summit in Geneva. Then, with a voice heavy with sarcasm, Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, looked directly at Captain Ibrahim Traoré and said, "Some people here just aren't smart enough to run a country. Look at him. He's a soldier pretending to be a president. Dumb." The room went dead silent. A journalist dropped her pen. A translator stopped mid-sentence. The entire hall froze. You could feel the tension crawling on every skin in the room. Some gasped. Others looked away, too stunned to speak. Traoré didn't flinch. He just sat there, still, calm. Eyes focused straight ahead, unbothered. But the damage had been done. Western media outlets began whispering. Cameras zoomed in. Social media started buzzing. Many thought Traoré would explode or walk out. But then, just as the silence threatened to break the room apart, Barack Obama, who had remained quiet all evening, slowly adjusted his seat. And then he stood up. Without a word, he walked to the microphone. Everyone leaned forward. The world was about to hear something unforgettable. Barack Obama stood tall, steady, and calm. The weight of the room shifted instantly. He cleared his throat. The crowd went completely silent. You could hear cameras clicking in the back. Then he spoke. "You don't call a man dumb just because he didn't go to your schools. Some men gain wisdom not in lecture halls, but on the battlefield, in the streets, and in the struggle to keep their people alive." Gasps echoed through the room. Trump shifted in his seat. Obama wasn't done. "Captain Traoré isn't dumb. He's brave. When bombs were falling, he didn't hide behind security. When his people were starving, he didn't fly to golf courses. He fought. He led. He bled for them." Applause began to build. Slowly, then louder. This man took a broken, exploited country and stood it back on its feet. That isn't dumb. That's courage. That's leadership. At that moment, the cameras panned to Traoré, still silent. But his eyes glistened. Not with weakness, but with the weight of being seen. Obama's voice lowered. "The world has watched Africa long enough. It's time we start listening." And then, the entire room stood. A standing ovation for Ibrahim Traoré, but something was coming next that nobody expected. As applause thundered, Traoré remained seated. He wasn't moved by claps or cameras. He had seen too much. Villages burned, children orphaned, mothers buried in unmarked graves. He didn't come for approval. He came for truth. Barack Obama looked at him and gave a small nod, a gesture of respect. Traoré finally rose, slowly, one hand placed gently over his heart. He walked to the podium, but he didn't speak. Instead, he held up a photograph, a wrinkled, worn-out image of a young Burkinabe girl, barefoot, holding a bowl of dry rice. "This," he said in soft French-accented English, "is why I lead." The photo lit up the giant screens behind him. The room went still again, but this time out of reverence. "You call me dumb, but I speak 6 languages. I command an army, I govern a nation, and still, I sleep on a cot and eat with my soldiers. That girl, she's smarter than both of us. She survives without any of this." He paused. "I don't want applause. I want justice." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was emotional. People wiped tears. Some stood in silence. But deep in the crowd, someone from the U.S. media whispered into their mic, "This just changed everything." While the room clapped and millions around the world watched the standing ovation, a small group of U.S. aides seated near Trump leaned in. "We didn't expect this," one whispered. "Obama flipped the narrative," another said, and Traoré didn't even raise his voice. Trump sat frozen, his lips tightened, but he smiled, a fake one. Behind that smile was something else. Panic. Outside the summit, Twitter exploded. Hashtags like #Stand with Traoré and Africa Speaks began trending. Clips of Obama's words had already reached 10 million views. In 10 minutes. But inside the summit hall, something more subtle was happening. A European diplomat who had ignored Traoré all evening now stepped forward to shake his hand. A South American delegate bowed slightly in respect. For years, Africa had been silenced at global meetings, seen but rarely heard. But now, the world was leaning in. Traoré quietly returned to his seat. He looked down at a small notebook in his hand. Inside was a letter, handwritten, faded. It wasn't political. It was personal. From a woman the world had forgotten. And soon, her voice would change everything. As diplomats debated energy deals and migration policies, Traoré opened his notebook and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky. The ink had smudged in parts, but the words were clear. "My son, I do not know where you are tonight, but wherever you are, speak the truth, even if your voice shakes." It was from his mother. She had written it the night before she passed, back when Traoré was still a junior soldier, walking barefoot to deliver food to starving families in northern Burkina Faso. "They may not clap for you, they may laugh, but if your words carry our pain, you will never be alone." He blinked quickly, holding back tears. Then he stood. He wasn't called to speak again, but he stepped toward the side stage where journalists gathered. A microphone was there, unwatched, forgotten. Traoré picked it up. "I am not here for claps," he said softly. "I am here to tell the truth, not for Burkina Faso alone, but for all of Africa that has been spoken over for too long." Some journalists paused, others turned on their cameras. Traoré wasn't finished. "Let me tell you a story you've never heard, about what it costs to be called dumb, when you're the one holding your people together." The room went still again, not from insult this time, but from truth. Traoré's voice was calm, but every word was heavy. "In my village, when I was 9, my school collapsed in a storm. The roof crushed desks. 2 children died. No one came to rebuild. They said our lives were too small to matter." He looked directly into the cameras now. "So I studied under trees. I wrote math on the dirt. I read from torn pages. And when my mother was sick, I learned how to make medicine from roots because the clinic was 3 days away." Gasps. Then silence. A few reporters began to tear up. "You call that dumb?" he asked. His voice cracked, just slightly. "They call me a soldier, but I'm just a boy who grew up too fast. Because we had no time to be kids. We had to protect each other." A pause. "So no, I won't stay silent. Not when our pain is mocked on global stages." Then he turned away from the mic and walked back to his seat. No applause, just stunned silence and wet eyes. But behind the scenes, something big was about to erupt. Obama had one more move. Just as Traoré sat down, a CNN journalist raised her hand. She didn't ask a question. She just spoke. "Mr. President, I wasn't supposed to say this, but I grew up in Flint, Michigan. The water made my sister sick. She couldn't breathe at night. We wrote letters to the White House. No one came." The room shifted again. Even Obama looked over with concern. "But last year, we saw a photo of you holding a child in Burkina Faso, her belly swollen from hunger. That picture stayed with me. It reminded me of my sister. You sat in the dirt with her." Traoré blinked slowly, his jaw clenched. That moment, he remembered it well. "You're not dumb," the journalist continued, her voice trembling. "You cared. That's what leadership is." Silence followed. It was no longer just about Trump's insult. This was becoming something else, something deeper. Obama leaned toward a nearby aide and whispered something. Then he stood again. "The world needs to hear what's never been said," he told the crowd. "And tonight, that begins." Outside, protests had already begun forming in front of American embassies across Africa. Inside, Obama was about to flip the entire summit on its head. Obama reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I've kept this for 4 years," he said. "I never thought I'd read it out loud." He opened the letter gently. It was old, worn. You could see the creases from how many times it had been folded, unfolded, read again. This letter was sent by a group of teenage girls in Ouagadougou. Their school had no roof, no electricity, but they still studied every night under candlelight because they believed in something. The room leaned in. Obama read aloud, "Dear Mr. Obama, we do not want money. We want to be respected. We are not poor Africans. We are scientists, doctors, leaders. We are the future. Please do not forget us." The crowd went quiet. "I didn't forget them," Obama said. "But the world did. Until today." He walked toward Traoré and handed him the letter. "This belongs to you now." The cameras zoomed in on Traoré's hand as he held the letter. You could see his thumb trembling. And somewhere in the back row, a woman began to cry. This summit was no longer about politics. It was about dignity. And the world was listening. Traoré didn't speak. He didn't need to. He looked at the letter in his hand, then back at Obama. Then, very slowly, he raised the envelope to his chest and held it against his heart. The gesture said everything. In that moment, world leaders, people known for power, not emotion, lowered their eyes. Some began wiping tears. Across the internet, the video went viral. He held a letter tighter than any flag. Traoré said nothing, but the world heard him. In one room in New York, a former U.S. diplomat turned off the TV and whispered, "We've lost the narrative." But this wasn't about narrative anymore. It was about truth. That night, major news stations reran the footage of Traoré again and again. On TikTok, young African creators stitched their own stories to it. On Instagram, his image went global. But while the media stormed, Ibrahim sat alone backstage. He opened the letter again. Inside, one girl had signed her name, Fatimata, age 14. "I want to be a pilot." He whispered her name to himself and made a silent promise to the girl he'd never met. Backstage, a soft knock came at the door. It was a woman, older, with silver hair wrapped in a bright blue scarf. She held an envelope, her hands shaking. "President Traoré," she said gently. He turned. His eyes widened. "I'm Fatimata's teacher," she said. "From the letter." Traoré stood frozen. "She's not with us anymore," the woman whispered. "She died during the protests, when the military fired into the crowd. She was holding a sign that read, 'My president believes in me.'" The room went cold. The teacher placed the envelope in his hand. Inside were two things. A photo of Fatimata wearing a cardboard pilot's hat. A second letter, one she never got to send. It read, "If they listen to you, maybe they'll listen to us. If you speak for us, maybe the world won't ignore our graves." Traoré sat down. He buried his face in his hands. And for the first time that night, he cried. A live stream camera, meant to cover the summit, was accidentally left on backstage. And for 2 full minutes, the world watched Ibrahim Traoré in silence. No speech, no defense. Just a man, young, burdened, breaking under the weight of a forgotten girl's letter. He didn't know it was live, but within minutes, Traoré Tears was trending. Not as mockery, as reverence. Real leaders cry for real people. He cried for someone he never met. That's power. This is not weakness. This is humanity. In Burkina Faso, crowds gathered around public TVs. Markets shut down. Radios replayed Obama's words. And now, Traoré's silent moment of pain. Even children watched. A young boy whispered to his mother, "Will our president be okay?" Back in Geneva, Obama was told what had happened. He watched the clip, and then he turned to the summit organizers and said, "He needs the final word. No more debates. Let the world hear him." Traoré, still unaware of the live footage, stepped back into the conference room. What happened next was something no one could prepare for. He didn't return to defend himself. He returned to tell a story, Fatimata's full story. Traoré stood in front of the microphone once more. No papers, no guards, just the letter in his hand. "I want to tell you about a girl you never knew." He paused. She lived 14 years without running water. She walked 3 miles to school. She lost her father in a mining accident. She taught herself English through a broken radio. She wanted to be a pilot. The audience leaned in, and last year during the student protest in Ouagadougou, she was shot in the chest. She died before the ambulance could arrive. Why? Because we had no ambulances. Some delegates lowered their heads. Others had tears forming in their eyes. She never saw a plane, but she believed she could fly one. He lifted the photo. "You call us dumb? You mock our pain? No. What's dumb is a world that lets Fatimata die nameless." Silence followed. Then, slowly, people began to rise, one by one. World leaders, journalists, security, even those who mocked him before. A full standing ovation. But this wasn't applause for politics. It was for a girl who dreamed and died waiting to be heard. And now, the world was finally listening. After the ovation, Traoré stood silently. His hands gripped the photo of Fatimata. Then softly he said, "I want to introduce you to someone else." The room waited. "Fatimata's mother is here. She waited outside all night because she thought no one would let her in." Gasps filled the air. The cameras turned. A thin woman, dressed in a faded wrapper and headscarf, stood just outside the security line. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but her spine, straight like steel. Obama walked to her, gently held her hand and led her into the room. No one stopped him. When she reached the front, she looked at Traoré and said, "My daughter died believing in you." Traoré's lips trembled. She said, "When he speaks, it feels like the sky opens for us." That broke him. He turned away for a second, trying to breathe, but there was none left to catch. "Thank you," he whispered. Then, in front of the world, he bowed. Not to power, not to applause, but to a mother. One of millions across Africa who bury their children in silence. No one sat down. The room no longer felt like a summit hall. It felt like a place of mourning and of truth. Diplomats who once scrolled through phones now wept openly. Even Donald Trump looked shaken, his face no longer smug but stiff, not from shame but confusion. He hadn't expected the insult to backfire like this. And Obama? He whispered something to one of the summit coordinators, then announced, "In honor of Fatimata and millions like her, we suspend all formal talks. Today, we listen." The microphones were opened. One by one, delegates shared their truths. A young leader from Haiti spoke about hunger. A woman from Kenya told how her father died waiting for insulin. A Syrian doctor shared how war turned his hospital into rubble. Then a child, brought in by a UN worker, spoke from the floor holding a paper. "I want to be president one day, like the man who cried for someone else's daughter. No script, no politics, just stories, real ones." And Traoré, he just sat quietly, listening. The leader who had been insulted had become the man the world now looked to for healing. Hours passed. No more suits, no more policy slides, just tears and truth. By late evening, the room dimmed. A golden sunset spilled through the summit glass panels, casting soft light on everyone's faces. A global news anchor whispered on live TV, "We came here for deals. We leave with grief, unity, and something bigger than politics. Then, unexpectedly, a choir of refugee children, invited to sing earlier, stepped into the center of the room. They hadn't been called. They simply stood and sang Amazing Grace in soft African harmonies. Some sobbed. Others held hands. Traoré turned to the mother beside him. She was crying, but smiling too. "She's still flying," she whispered. That was the moment everything shifted. In that quiet hour, politics paused, and history listened. This wasn't about Africa rising anymore. This was about humanity remembering itself. As the last note of the choir faded, the room sat in silence. Then, a UN official stepped to the podium. "There's a seat that's remained empty at every global summit for the last 15 years, she said. A symbolic chair, meant to honor the voices of the voiceless. Today, we give it a name." She turned to Traoré. "Fatimata." The audience gasped. Then slowly, they clapped, not out of habit, but from the heart. Traoré stood. "Thank you," he said, barely above a whisper. "But this chair isn't just for Fatimata. It's for every child who died with a dream still buried in their chest. From Ouagadougou to Gaza, from Haiti to Syria, from Southside Chicago to Sudan." He turned to Trump. "You called me dumb, but I speak for the silent. That makes me dangerous to those who fear truth." Trump said nothing. Obama stepped forward, gently placed a hand on Traoré's shoulder. History will remember this day. And then the summit officially ended. But the movement, it had just begun. Back in Burkina Faso, something unimaginable happened. A military general who had long opposed Traoré went on national radio and said, "I may not agree with everything he does, but after what I saw in Geneva, I know he speaks for our people." Thousands marched in the streets, not to protest, but to honor Fatimata. Her photo, the one with her cardboard pilot hat, became a symbol, a mural, a flag. Across Africa, children began writing letters to their leaders. "Don't forget us," one said. "We are still here." In Europe and America, people, many for the first time, started learning how Burkina Faso even got its name. A teacher in South Africa began a campaign called Let Her Fly to raise funds for girls in rural villages. All of it sparked by one insult, one girl, and one leader who chose dignity over rage. And Traoré. He returned home quietly. No parade, no press. But the people met him anyway, lining the streets, singing not songs of politics, but lullabies their mothers used to sing. "Fly high, Fatimata. We see you now." And somewhere deep in the sky, it finally felt like she did. 6 months later, on a rainy morning in Ouagadougou, a small white building opened. It was simple, modest, but strong. Fatimata Traoré's School for Girls, built by donations from around the world, named not just in her memory, but in her honor. At the opening ceremony, Traoré stood before a class of barefoot girls in bright uniforms. He held Fatimata's final letter in his hand. "This," he said, "is not a school, it's a promise. And it takes great memory. It will not be forgotten. Our dreams are valid, and our president will never let the world turn and smile again." The girls stood and saluted. They saw the flag wave, behind the clouds, behind the cameras. One dream took flight. Their villa. If the story touched your heart, if you felt even a single tear, if you believe that one child can change the